Life in my neighborhood had always been a balancing act between enjoying the quiet of suburbia and tolerating the constant prying eyes of the homeowners association. I had moved here because of the wide streets, the tall oak trees, and the promise of peaceful evenings in my backyard. For years, my home was my sanctuary. But little did I know, one neighbor, and one homeowners association, would test my patience in ways I never imagined. At the heart of it all were my hedges. They weren't just shrubs to me. These tall, thick hedges lined the edge of my property, separating my backyard from the street, and giving me the privacy I craved. I planted them with my own hands when I first moved in. I watered them, trimmed them, and shaped them season after season until they formed a lush green wall, almost like nature's curtain, protecting me from the outside world. They had grown with me, through the years, through their ups and downs, through quiet barbecues on summer nights and long mornings with coffee in hand. The hedges meant peace. They meant solitude. They meant my home was truly mine. But as anyone who's ever lived in an HOA-controlled neighborhood knows, peace doesn't always last. Enter Karen. Now, if you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with a so-called HOA Karen, you already know the type. She was the self-appointed sheriff of the neighborhood, patrolling with her little clipboard, always ready to point out violations no one else cared about. Her house was directly across the street from mine, and I swear she made it her life's mission to keep her binoculars trained on my property. At first, it was little things. A notice on my door about trash cans left out for too long. Another about holiday lights displayed past the regulation date. She even once left a handwritten letter, complete with bullet points, explaining why my lawn was not aligned with community standards. I brushed it off at first. After all, every neighborhood has that one person. But Karen wasn't just any neighbor, she was on the HOA board, which meant she had power. And if there's one thing worse than an HOA busybody, it's one with actual authority. Still, I kept my head down. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn trimmed, and made sure the mailbox was freshly painted each year. I followed their rules, even when they were ridiculous. Because as long as I had my hedges, none of it really mattered. I could step into my backyard, close the gate, and be in my own world, hidden away from Karen's constant watch. But Karen hated my hedges. It started with offhand comments. "Those bushes are awfully tall, don't you think?" she'd say with a fake smile. "Don't you think they look a little unkempt?" Another time, she claimed they blocked visibility for drivers turning the corner, even though my house wasn't anywhere near an intersection. I knew what it was really about: control. She couldn't stand that there was a part of my life she couldn't monitor. My hedges meant privacy, and privacy meant freedom from her judgmental gaze. That drove her crazy. The HOA sent me letters. First, a friendly reminder that landscaping must remain in accordance with neighborhood guidelines. Then a formal warning that vegetation must not exceed the acceptable height limit of 6 feet. The funny part? My hedges were exactly 6 feet. I had measured them myself. Twice. This wasn't about the rules. It was about Karen. The stares from across the street got worse. Sometimes I'd catch her standing in her yard, hands on her hips, glaring at the hedges like they were some sort of personal insult. Other times, she'd snap photos with her phone, probably to bring them up in the next HOA meeting. It was exhausting. But I held my ground. Those hedges were mine, and as far as I was concerned, they weren't going anywhere. I thought I could weather the storm. I thought the worst she could do was send letters and glare at me. But I was wrong. Because Karen wasn't about to settle for letters and dirty looks. She was about to cross a line that no neighbor, no HOA, no anyone should ever cross. And when she did, that's when everything changed. It was a Saturday morning. The kind of day where the sun shines just right, and the air smells fresh after a light rain the night before. I had plans to mow the lawn, maybe grill some burgers later, and enjoy the weekend in peace. But peace was the last thing I got that day. I was halfway through making coffee when I heard the sound. At first, I didn't think much of it, just the low growl of machinery, buzzing faintly through the kitchen window. Maybe someone down the street was trimming trees or doing yard work. But as the noise grew louder, more distinct, a chill ran through me. That wasn't just yard work. That was a hedge trimmer. I put down my mug and stepped outside, my slippers crunching on the driveway gravel. And there she was, Karen. Standing right on the edge of my property, bright yellow gardening gloves on her hands, wielding a power trimmer like some deranged suburban warrior. And my hedges. She was hacking away at them. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice carrying down the street. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen didn't even flinch. She kept right on buzzing through the branches, leaves falling in heaps at her feet. A neighbor walking his dog slowed down, wide-eyed, watching the scene unfold. I stormed across the yard. "This is my property. You can't just..." Karen finally turned off the trimmer and looked at me with that smug, self-satisfied smile I had come to despise. "Actually," she said, drawing out the word, "I can. The HOA voted, and your hedges are in violation. I'm just helping you out." Helping me out? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Helping me out? You're trespassing. You're destroying my property. She shrugged like it was nothing. They were an eyesore. You should be thanking me. Now your yard will look much cleaner, and the neighborhood won't have to stare at those overgrown bushes anymore. Her words cut deeper than the trimmer. Those hedges weren't just bushes, they were years of my work, my money, my sweat poured into keeping them alive and healthy. They were my privacy, my boundary between myself and the world. And she had taken it upon herself to butcher them without so much as a knock on the door. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to control the storm of anger brewing inside me. Neighbors were watching now, a small crowd gathering like this was some kind of neighborhood theater. Some shook their heads in disapproval, others whispered to each other, probably relieved it wasn't their property under attack. "Get off my property," I said through gritted teeth. Karen crossed her arms, chin raised defiantly. "If you don't like it, take it up with the board. But the hedges are coming down, one way or another. You should have listened when we told you to trim them." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that trimmer and toss it into the street. But I knew that's exactly what she wanted, an outburst, something she could use against me. So instead, I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. "Fine," I said. "We'll let the police sort this out." Her smirk faltered for just a second. When the officers arrived, they listened to both sides. Karen spewed her usual nonsense about community guidelines and safety concerns, while I explained, calmly but firmly, that she had stepped onto my property without permission and destroyed my hedges. One of the officers glanced at the trimmer still in her hand and sighed. You can't do this. If you have an issue with his property, you need to file a complaint through proper channels. You can't just take matters into your own hands." I thought that would be the end of it. That maybe, just maybe, she'd learn her lesson. But Karen wasn't the type to back down. As the officers walked back to their cruiser, she leaned closer to me and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "This isn't over. I'll make sure those hedges never grow back." And in that moment, I knew she wasn't just being difficult, she was declaring war. That night, I stood in my yard, staring at the stumps and shredded branches where my beautiful green wall used to be. The silence felt heavier than ever, the privacy I had cherished ripped away in one afternoon. I could see straight into Karen's house across the street now. And I hated it. But as angry as I wasn't defeated. If she thought this was the end, she had another thing coming. Because I wasn't just going to replace the hedges. I was going to build something better. Something stronger. Something permanent. And there wasn't a thing the HOA, or Karen, could do about it. That night, staring at the ruins of my hedges, I had two choices. I could file endless complaints with the HOA, go back and forth in tedious hearings, maybe even take Karen to small claims court. But that would drag on for months, maybe years, and in the end, I'd still be stuck without the privacy that meant so much to me. Or I could take matters into my own hands. Not with reckless anger. Not with vandalism or revenge that could backfire. No, if Karen wanted a fight, I was going to fight her the smart way. With something solid. Something that no hedge trimmer or HOA complaint could erase. That's when the idea hit me, a wall. Not a flimsy wooden fence. Not a replacement row of hedges. A cinder block wall. I spent the next week buried in research. HOA covenants, municipal codes, city ordinances. I read them all like a law student cramming for finals. And what I found made me grin. There were rules about hedges. There were rules about fences. But walls? Nothing. Apparently, no one in the HOA had ever imagined a homeowner would build a full cinder block wall. They were too focused on lawns, mailboxes, and aesthetic harmony. And as long as I kept it within my property line, under the city's maximum height restriction, and structurally sound, it was perfectly legal. So, I called up a contractor. When I told him what I wanted, he raised an eyebrow. A cinder block wall. Around your whole yard. That's right, I said. Sturdy. 6 feet tall. Maybe a nice finish on the outside, so it looks clean. He chuckled. Somebody giving you trouble. You could say that. Construction began on a sunny Monday morning. The sound of trucks backing up, workers unloading pallets of cinder blocks, and cement mixers whirring echoed down the street. I stood in my driveway, arms crossed, watching Karen peek through her curtains like a hawk circling its prey. The first shovel hit the ground, and she stormed across the street. What is this? She demanded, pointing at the growing stacks of blocks. My new wall, I said evenly. Since you destroyed my hedges, I figured it was time for an upgrade. You can't do this, she screeched. The HOA won't allow it. Oh, I already checked, I said, enjoying the way her face twitched. Turns out, there's no rule against walls. Not in the bylaws, not in the city code. So unless you've got a time machine to go back and rewrite the regulations, this wall is happening. Her jaw dropped, and for the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She spun on her heel and stomped away, muttering something about calling an emergency board meeting. For the next several days, my property became the center of the neighborhood. Neighbors slowed their cars to watch. Some even stopped by to say, "Good for you," or finally, someone stood up to her. A few whispered that they wished they'd thought of it themselves. Karen, on the other hand, was losing her mind. She sent me letters. She filed violations. She even showed up at the construction site one morning, clipboard in hand, trying to convince the workers they didn't have proper permits. They just laughed and told her to take it up with City Hall. When she called an emergency HOA meeting, I showed up with copies of every ordinance, every permit, every line of legal proof that I was in the right. By the time I was done, the board members were nodding and shrugging, clearly realizing there was nothing they could do. Karen, red in the face, shouted, "This is against the spirit of the community. One of the board members sighed. Karen, spirit isn't law. He's within his rights. That was the moment I knew I'd won. By the end of the month, the wall was complete. Smooth grey cinder blocks, reinforced with steel and filled with concrete, capped with a clean row of finished stone. It was a fortress, not just physically, but symbolically. No longer could Karen peek into my yard. No longer could she complain about hedges or privacy or aesthetics. I had built a line she could never cross again. The first time I stepped into my backyard and closed the gate behind me, the feeling was indescribable. The noise of the street faded. The view of Karen's house disappeared. It was just me, my grill, my lawn chair, and the sweet silence of victory. Karen tried, of course. She filed more complaints, each one shot down by the HOA or the city. She claimed the wall was intimidating, that it brought down property values, even that it was a safety hazard for children, despite the fact that no kids ever played near my yard. But the more she fought, the more ridiculous she looked. Neighbors grew tired of her antics. Some even started avoiding her, crossing the street when she walked her dog, no longer entertained by her constant drama. One evening, a neighbor I barely knew walked over as I watered the flowers near the base of my new wall. He gave me a little nod and said, "You know, we've all been dealing with her for years. But you're the first person who actually shut her down. Respect." That meant more to me than I can explain. Looking back, Karen thought cutting down my hedges would be the final move, that she'd embarrass me, force me to bow to her authority, and establish her control over the neighborhood. But instead, she unleashed something she couldn't stop. My hedges are gone, yes. But in their place stands something stronger, tougher, and permanent. A wall that not only protects my privacy, but also reminds everyone, especially Karen, that intimidation has its limits. You can only push a person so far before they push back. And when I pushed back, I pushed with cinder blocks and cement. Now, every time I sit in my backyard, grilling dinner or sipping a cold drink, I can't help but smile. Because on the other side of that wall, I know Karen is fuming, realizing that her little war only ended up building me a fortress. And the best part? There's not a single thing she can do about it.